So let's welcome Bermal. So Bermal has been a postdoc at the Social Justice Center for the past year, and her stay is almost over, so we will miss her a lot. So Bermal's research focuses on transformations in feminist politics and subjectivities since the 2000s, with particular emphasis on Turkey. She has taught courses in the sociology of gender and as adjunct lecturer in various universities in Turkey. And her interests have been shaped by her Kurdish identity.
Thank you so much. Hello, friends. I know you're very tired, but I have a bad news for you. My presentation will not be so short. It will be a little bit long. Yeah, I'm sorry for that. Okay, in my presentation, friends, I will talk about feminist movement in Turkey. I will focus more specifically on post-2000 period, but I will make some references to 1980s and 1990s. I would like to go back much further historically, but unfortunately, I don't have time to do that because the political atmosphere in Turkey, especially since the last 2 decades, is very, very intense and very dynamic. You know, I wanted to go back further, but I will not have time to do that. So I'm sorry for that. So before getting into feminism, I would like to briefly describe the general atmosphere of the post-2000 period in Turkey, especially for those who are not familiar with Turkey. So when we say post-2000 period, friends, we are basically talking about the AKP government. So AKP government, the Justice and Development Party, it's led by Erdogan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And AKP came to power in 2002, and they are still in power. And yeah, in Turkey, people generally divide this period into 2 phases. The first phase of AKP and the second phase of AKP. So when AKP first came to the power, it hadn't achieved a significant electoral victory. So they needed the support of broad social segments to consolidate its power and to achieve its long-term agenda. So what did they do? They wanted to, engage in an intensive process of consent production. So they come up with the narrative of democratization, arguing that Turkey was not a democratic country. It's a highly exclusionary country. Why? Because the secularism underlying the ideology of republic excludes Islamic groups, and its nation-state framework exclude Kurds. So we aim to reintegrate these excluded social groups into political sphere and social sphere. So they took series of steps about that. For example, they took some steps regarding Kurdish issue, although these steps were not at the level of, at the constitutional and structural level. And this period also followed by the peace process between PKK. So I will talk about PKK later. So meanwhile, they also reinitiated the negotiation process with, for European Union memberships. So this also required commitment to support ethnic and religious minorities, LGBT groups, and women's rights. So in the, at the initial phase of AKP period, we see that as relatively, the period that witnessed a partial expansion of political sphere and civil society. So this picture, friends, began change, especially in the second half of 2010s, and more specifically after the Gezi resistance in 2013 and the general election in 2015. And these 2 movements has been very critical in this, in the transformation of political atmosphere in Turkey. So, after this period, an authoritarian phase began to manifest itself. People resisted this turn, and they continue to resist. However, over time, AKP had already consolidated its power, so it has been difficult to challenge it. So I will detail this, authoritarian phase later in my presentation. So turning now to feminism. Feminist movements, friends, has experienced a significant transformation during the post-2000 period, especially after the 2010s in Turkey. I would like to categorize this transformation into 5 main themes. First, the development of more organic relations among different feminist groups and the formation of alliances. The expansion of the movement beyond narrow political circles and taking a grassroots character. The diffusion of the feminism into broader leftist groups, shaping their political access and providing them with an methodological and conceptual tools, as well as hope and inspiration. The diversification of the feminist movement's field of struggle and the strengthening of the transnational character of feminism. So let me start with the relation among different feminist groups. In Turkey, friends, second wave feminism in Turkey emerged in the early 1980s. So we are basically talking about very small group of women. Of course, by the way, we had a huge women's movement and feminist figures before 1980s. But, for the first time, the small group of women emerged in the political scene saying that we define themselves as feminist. So we are this, we are a second wave feminist movement. So what did they do? They shared a common concern. They wanted to establish feminism as an autonomous movement in Turkey. What is autonomous? Autonomous here refers to the struggle to establish feminism, a feminist movement out of Marxism. So these women, they're also Marxist, they're also socialist, and they had nothing to do with the state ideology, and they had an, anti-systemic perspective. So I would say that they positioned themselves at the far left of the political spectrum. So by the 1990s, friends, we see that new actors enter the political scene. These are Kurdish women's movement, Muslim, feminist, and LGBT movement. So I will start with the relationship between Kurdish women's movement and feminist movement. Again, I need to provide very briefly an historical background to understand the Kurdish women's movement, friends. So Kurdish women's movement is a part of the Kurdish movement in Turkey. And by the way, I'm specifically focused on the Turkish context. So because, Kurdish movement has its other branches in the Middle East. So the Kurdish movement consists of 2 main branches. The armed wing, namely the PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party, and its civil political wing that include political organizations, municipalities, associations, institutions, and media, and so on. And the PKK was founded in 1978 as a guerrilla movement with a Marxist-Leninist perspective. Their initial goal was to establish independent socialist Kurdistan, and their leader is Abdullah Öcalan. So when we come to the 1990s, friends, we see that the question of women, the issue of women had begun to enter the movement's political concern. So what happened? We observed that there was a significant participation of young Kurdish women in the guerrilla force. And their participation had a profound impact on the transforming gender relations and gender code in everyday life and in political life as well. Why? Because these guerrilla figures turn into kind of idealized figures, and you have woman guerrillas, and they are fighting the state in the mountains. They are fighting the state in the mountains, and this made it difficult to difficult to claim that, women are incapable of doing that, women are less capable of doing that. So if women are able to fight the state with the guns in your hand, then, they can do anything. So this was very important in the political history of the Kurdish movement. And we see that this women's perspective resonated in civil organization too. For example, women's commissions were established in the, in their parties and organizations. However, in this period, friends, we see that male dominance was still highly decisive in the political organizations. For example, women's decisions within these commissions, within women's commissions, were not taken seriously. And even sometimes we see that men could be appointed to lead these women's commissions. So in this period, they talk about women's liberation, but still men's dominance is very decisive in the political life, in everyday life, and in social lives too. So this was also a period of intense conflict between the PKK and the state. So during the 1990s, friends, we saw the assimilation policies, forced displacement, tortures, and disappearance in custody, and many others. So these war conditions led significant number of Kurds, Kurds, let's say, to move to metropolitan cities in the West. And they continue to practice their political engagement in the places that they moved to. And they came together with feminists in these cities on various platforms. So their encounters, the encounters of feminists and the feminists with Kurdish women's movement, we see that there's these interactions involve both solidarity and conflicts and tensions. So, by the way, when I'm saying feminist, I am basically talking about the socialist and radical feminists. I mean, or anti-systemic feminists. Why? Because of course in Turkey we have many other feminists, more systemic feminists too. But I think the movement itself, the feminist movement, is led by this anti-systemic aspect of these feminists. So this is why they give the character, they give the character of the movement. So socialist and radical feminists of the period were not completely blind to the war in the region. So, they used to write and speak about state violence, sexual harassment, and rape in custody, but they also had a chronic tension. So what was this tension? For example, during the March 8 rally and its organizations, Kurdish women wanted to voice, their national demands, and they also wanted to chant slogans referring to Abdullah Öcalan, their political leader. And feminists, on the other hand, they were not happy with that because, they wanted to prioritize women's issue in the 8 March rally. They were like, okay, this is 8 March, so we need to prioritize women's question only. So, and the slogans referring to a male leader was not acceptable for feminists. Why? Because, so you're chanting, so in our perspective, according to our perspective, feminist movement cannot have a leader and they cannot have a male leader. So this has been a very chronic problem between Kurdish women and feminist movement in Turkey. For this reason, friends, for the first time in 2003, feminists began to organize their own autonomous night marches. So I would like to read a quote about this tension because I think it is very revealing. It shows very the atmosphere of that period in the period of 1990s. So this quote comes from an interview with Gülnur Acar Savran. Gülnur Acar she's one of the more important figures of the feminist movement. And she's also the founding figures of the second wave feminism in Turkey. And referring to the 1990s, she says, during that period, she talks about the 1990s. During that period, we were not sufficiently sensitive to the feminist perspective emphasized by Kurdish women. What caused this to happen? I don't know. Maybe we had a deep-seated chauvinism that we weren't aware of, but I don't believe it was the major cause. I believe the true reason was the effort to protect feminism with jealousy. At that time, Kurdish women were using the rhetoric of motherhood against the state, and we found this unsettling. We were worried that feminism would once again be sacrificed for other causes. So there are two important points that I want to clarify here. So when she says Kurdish women were using the rhetoric of motherhood against the state, she refers to the Saturday mothers in Turkey. So Saturday mothers in Turkey are a group of mothers seeking accountability for their disappeared children during the conflict between PKK and the state. And feminists used to criticize this rhetoric because, they said that, the motherhood, as a rhetoric, should not be a kind of a discourse that you gain your moral and political legitimacy. So, we try to dismantle motherhood, the idea of motherhood, but what you are doing, you are just simply, you're glorifying motherhood. So this was another issue. So second important point in this quote is this, that when she says, we were worried that feminism would again be sacrificed for other causes, she refers to the political memory of the socialist movement in the 1970s and 1980s. Because, socialist organization subsumed the women's question under the class issue. So the same risks applies to Kurdish women's movement. Yeah, Kurdish movement has their prior goal, which is, establishing Kurdistan, socialist Kurdistan. And here again, we will see that, women's issue will be instrumentalized under this broader framework, let's say, or struggle. So, so we see that there is an anxiety about this autonomy of the feminist movement in Turkey. Why? Because feminists in Turkey, feminist women, let's say, in Turkey face many difficulties when they try to build an autonomous feminist movement in the 1980s. They struggle a lot against the socialist organization that described feminism as a bourgeois movement. For this reason, they are sensitive about protecting this, autonomous character of the feminist movement. And this sensitivity, they still continue to shape the character of the feminist night marches today. Friends, in Turkey, cis men are not allowed to join the night march. So we have a specific commission, and that commission is responsible to push to exclude cis men out of the rally. And we have very, 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 very good, very beautiful slogans. We say that instead of trying to join the march, let's go home and wash the dishes and clean the house. Yeah, so, and this is our day, and let us enjoy our day. And also organizations and individuals are not permitted to participate with their flags of their own political organizations. Only feminist flags and LGBT flags are accepted in the march. So, so the post-2000 period witnessed the profound transformation in terms of the relationship between feminists and Kurdish women's movement. After 2000s, the Kurdish movement experienced a paradigmatic shift in its ideological orientation. They abandoned the goal of establishing a nation state. They instead embrace the democratic confederalism based on grassroots self-organization. So after the 2010, the state itself began to be considered as the source of the problem. So the society has to govern themselves instead of governed by the states. So, and women's liberation, women's liberation paradigm became the ontological axis of this new paradigm. So what does it mean? It means that they defined the patriarchy as the first form of domination, and all other system of oppression, for example, capitalism, colonialism, class state, are historically layered upon patriarchy. So no society can be truly free as long as women remain unfree. So what happened during that period? We see that Kurdish identity and gender identity came to be articulated on the same plane of political significance. This is very important because, in 1990s, yes, at that period, we also see that Kurdish women's movement, they struggle for women's liberation, women's emancipation. But at that period, we see that, Kurdish women, they also prioritize their Kurdish identity. Why? Because it's very understandable, because at that period, their Kurdish existence was under the threat. So there was a huge conflict. So they had to prioritize their Kurdish identity. But with this new paradigm, we see that Kurdish identity and their gender identity are equally important. So they began to implement this women's liberation paradigm in practice. They established autonomous women's units across every level of political, administrative, and military life. They brought co-chair system. So co-chair system, it's a mechanism that requires one man, one woman in every level of political life. And today in Turkey, France, Kurdish political parties and their municipalities are called by a man and by a woman. And they also increase their gender quota, a minimum of 40% quota for women across the political parties, local councils, and assemblies. With this quota, friends, their political party currently has the highest proportion of women in the parliament. This is very important because, through these policies, through these gender quotas and co-chair system, they raise the standards. They raise the standards of the politics in the parliament. They expanded the boundaries of political horizon. So this is very important because, friends, Kurdish people in Turkey have long been defined as, this primitive, backward, and terrorist. And now we see that these primitive people are teaching the democracy. They are teaching the equality in the parliament. So this is very important. And the other important point here is this, that these transformations were accompanied by a theoretical and epistemic intervention. The Kurdish women's movement developed the idea of genealogy. So genealogy is an alternative way of knowledge production based on women's perspective. So it is different from feminist theory. Of course, they have common ground for sure, but they also have differences. Unfortunately, I don't have time to dive into, but if you like to discuss more about this, the relations between genealogy and feminism, we can talk about after the workshop. I will have time for some time. We can talk about later. So, all these developments, friends, change the parameters of the dynamics between Kurdish women's movement and feminist movement in Turkey. I don't say that the tensions and divergences have entirely disappeared. No, for example, there is an ongoing, tension around the idea of genealogy. However, the dynamics of the relationship have begun to take a more organic character. Contacts and interaction with the Kurdish women's movement increased, and they began to listen more closely to each other's experiences. They learned about each other's concerns and sensitivities, and learned to meet on the common ground. So, yeah. So now I would like to talk about the relationship between Muslim feminists and, let's say, secular feminists. These terminologies, by the way, is very problematic. Yeah. During the 1990s, friends, a group of Muslim women began to question the gender inequalities within their own Islamic communities. In earlier periods, demands for equality between men and women were unthinkable because men's position and women's position were believed to be determined by the God. And there was no room for the debate on this matter. But in that period, women, I mean, when I say women, of course, I am talking about a very small group of women, began to think that Islam could not be a religion that justified such an inequality between man and woman. So they wanted to question this inequality, and they wanted to reinterpret the Quran. Feminist stance on this issue was clear, let's say. Islam was a, religious that ontologically subordinates women. It commands women to cover their bodies and restricts their freedom. No path to equality can emerge from this. And of course, this had caused a serious tension between two groups. So, friends, I would say that feminists and leftist people in general, let's say, they have a distance to distance to dominant religion, dominant ethnic groups, So Islam in Turkey is a dominant religion. So they have a kind of distance to this dominant religions and dominant ideologies, let's say. So another issue was headscarves. Muslim women began to politicize the headscarf as they were prohibited from entering university. I'm talking about still, by the way, I'm talking about the 1990s. So they organized protests in front of the universities. And again, feminists had an ambivalent attitude on this issue. They didn't want women to be deprived of their education on the one hand, but they also didn't want to support the headscarf because they defined it as a form of oppression against women's body. So there was a kind of, there was a solidarity. I wouldn't say that, there's no solidarity. There was a solidarity, but this solidarity is a distant solidarity, or let's say ambivalent solidarity. By the way, Muslim women were also quite distant from feminism at that period. They used to read feminist publication of the period, and they were influenced by them, and they advocated the struggle for equality, but they viewed feminism as Western tradition, and they didn't want it to be seen or defined as feminist. So they were also distant from the core feminist issues, such as right to abortion, politics of private sphere, and the critique of family as an institutions. Family, they used to say that, yes, we have kind of inequality in our families. We might have violence in our families, but the problem is not the family itself. It's the inequality that we have inside. So after 2000s, we see that a new generation of Muslim feminists emerge, and especially after the 2010s. Their stance, the stance of this new generation differed radically from the previous generation. This new generation openly identified themselves as feminist. They established their autonomous feminist platforms. They began to discuss body politics and sexuality, topics that previous generation distanced from. They criticized the institution of family, and they openly defended abortion right. The previous generation in 1990s, for example, they didn't want to defend abortion right because abortion was a criminal in their account. So I would say that, friends, so after the 2010s, so many things happened, but the other important thing is that this Muslim woman, this Muslim feminists, they politicized and socialized in a political atmosphere where AKP and Islamic government, take the power. So they had no problem with the headscarves. So they had their university educations. So, and this young generation in their university educations and in, for example, in social sciences, in gender and women studies at the universities, they engage a lot with this third wave feminism, intersectionality, post-structuralist account, and and in this way, both Kurdish women's movement and Muslim movement, they criticized a lot because the superior position of the second wave feminism in Turkey. And I think this criticism enabled feminists to learn their own political limits and their borders. So LGBT and feminism. In the 1990s, there was there's some kind of relationship between feminist and LGBT groups, but it was not so strong. Feminists used to speak against police violence targeting trans sex workers and systemic police raids in the neighborhoods where LGBT community lived. But heterosexism, the question of heterosexism, didn't occupy an important place in feminist political agenda. I mean, heterosexism was not yet integrated into feminist analysis of patriarchy. After 2000s, we see that LGBT movement opened an important space for itself. Within the framework of the European Union accession negotiations, LGBT associations gained a legal status, and this gave them significant room to act. There was a major increase in organizing street protests and political gatherings, and they began to organize Pride March. The first Pride March in Turkey was held in 2003 with around 40 participants, friends. And this number reached the thousands in 2009. Why? Because in 2009, the government wanted to close Lambda, an Istanbul-based LGBT organization. Lambda is so we have Lambda and Kaos GL, let's say. And Kaos GL is Ankara-based LGBT association, and Lambda Istanbul is Istanbul-based. So these are two very important associations. So when government wanted to close Lambda, people from many different political parties and leftist organizations joined the march in support. For the first time, they joined the Pride March to support LGBT people. This was very important because it showed that homophobia and transphobia within the left were also beginning to change. For the first time, we saw that LGBT movement being actively supported by such a broad segment of the left. This is very important because, in Turkey, friends, we hadn't homophobia, transphobia in left, even sometimes in feminist organization too. Yes, of course, today many things change and we don't see a kind of huge transphobia, homophobia within feminism, but at that period, in the 90s and the early 2000s, so there was this homophobia. So, and the second important turning point in terms of pride occurred during the Gezi resistance in 2013. In the year of the Gezi resistance and the years that follow, this number reached hundreds of thousands. Christian, can you please? So I will show you a very small image that depict the Pride March in 2013, or it might be 2014. I'm not sure about that. So this is France Pride March in Taksim. This is Taksim Square, by the way. Taksim Square, thank you, Christian. Taksim Square is central site of political protest and mobilization is in Istanbul. It has a very, symbolic place in Turkey's collective political memory. So people gather in Taksim Square and then move along Istiklal Street. So Istiklal Street is this is important. Istiklal Street, friends, is 1.4 kilometers street connecting to Taksim Square. So feminists and LGBT people, they gather in this square and they start their march across the Istiklal Street. So this is Istiklal Street, friends, at that period. So yeah, it's and this was incredible development for us. Even we as feminists, we were like, what's going on here? What is this? Because yes, it was the first time we couldn't. What's happening in Turkey? We were amazing. It was amazing, and this is very important because, friends, until a very short time before, LGBT people in Turkey hadn't been able to exist in public with their open identities, and now, cross-dresser with their open identities were performing in public, and they are challenging their, society's moral values. By the way, so after 2015, we will not see this kind of marches because the government radically restrict these marches. So today in Turkey, we don't see this kind of mass pride marches, unfortunately. And the other important point during this period, Judith Butler's book were translated into Turkish, and Kaos GL, the Ankara-based LGBT organization, organized an anti-homophobia gathering, and they also invited Judith Butler. It was a huge gathering. It was amazing again. And with this translation of Butler's books, the feminist movement's conceptual repertoire and their way of thinking moved beyond binary gender framework. So of course, this doesn't happen in a very smooth way. We also had very problems. For example, feminists in Turkey have long tried to underline the identity of womanhood. They try to underline how we need to underline this, the idea of womanhood, because they have been suppressed. So we have to appear them again. And now, and queer theory emerged, and it says that, okay, so these are problematic gender definitions. So of course, we had very problems. We experienced very, bad experiences, but after these, discussions, I would say that, LGBT people and feminist movement, they are on the same ground. So I would say that we solve all these problems. And feminists also revise their analysis of patriarchy, making it heteropatriarchy. So today in Turkey, when we say patriarchy, we always say heteropatriarchy. So I would say that there has been a substantial integration at both theoretical level and political level. So today, LGBT movement and feminist movement act like a single body, I would say. Another important development of this period, friends, has been the expansion of feminist ideas beyond narrow feminist circles. So, in which directions did this expansion unfold? First, we observed a significant increase in artistic and cultural production, in the number of academic works, and substantial growth in feminist web pages, blogs, and social media accounts. And it also expanded towards broader leftist organization. In Turkey, the idea of feminism is a bourgeois ideology was very prominent until the early 2000 period. And since the 2010s, this tendency has given way to a growing embrace of feminism among socialist organizations. Of course, in Turkey, there are still some socialist organizations. They do not want to define themselves as feminists, but many of them, they began to, the women in this organization, they began to define themselves as feminists, and they established their autonomous feminist, let's say, subgroups. Yeah, one of the most visible indicators of this expansion was the feminist night marches. In Turkey, France, the feminist night march was first organized in 2003. So this is the first feminist night march, France, and we see that there is only 100 people participate in the first night march. From the 2010s onward, participation grew exponentially, reaching hundreds of thousands of people. And in 2018, for example, New York Times featured, featured the Istanbul Night March on its front page. Yeah. And do I have any other? Yeah. So this is the latest version of feminist movement. It's again in Taksim, in Istiklal streets. Friends, it's amazing. You know, I cannot tell you. So there's a kind of state of, collective effervescence, like kind of collective explosion, and the energy never fades. The government shut down the public transportation leading to the protest area, and surrounds the center of Istanbul with police barricades. Yet women still find ways to reach the area. So the government really cannot prevent women to gather. And we experienced this shift, friends, towards authoritarianism, especially after 2015. So what happened 2015? After Kurdish movement adopted democratic confederalism, they expanded their political goal beyond Kurdish question. They addressed the emancipation of all other suppressed groups, including LGBT, workers, and other ethnic and religious groups. So they basically targeted the democratization of Turkey as a whole. And what happened? This perspective resulted in the formation of the new political party, namely People's Democratic Party, HDP, feminist, various social organizations, and LGBT people, and of course Kurds, gathered around this party. And in the election in 2015, friends, People's Democratic Party achieved a significant success in this election. So with this achievement, AKP, for the first time since the 2002, lost its parliamentary majority. And AKP didn't accept the election results. So, and the story starts here. And so the Kurds once again became the target of the state violence. So we had a huge conflict in the Kurdish cities. So the parties, co-chairs, and many political figures were imprisoned. Trustees were appointed to Kurdish municipalities. By the way, it's not only Kurds. The left as a whole increasingly became the target of the state. And today, friends, even main opposition party in Turkey is under serious attacks by the AKP government. So this was followed by the termination of peace process between PKK and the state. So on the other hand, we have witnessed the rise of conservative policies through the attacks on women's and LGBT rights and their bodies. So of course, I would say that these attacks didn't emerge in a year. We had already been experiencing these attacks for some time, but after 2015, these attacks intensified significantly. So, friends, I really don't have time to list them all, but what happened during that period? Women were encouraged to have at least 3 children. In 2014, Recep Tayyip Erdogan stated that gender equality is against human nature. Efforts were made to restrict divorce. Women's rights to abortion were repeatedly brought into public debate. And in response, women organized strong protests. They established their platforms. And today in Turkey, friends, abortion is legal. But, AKP tried to ban it, but, they encountered a significant resistance against that. So in paper, it's legal, but when it comes to practice, women experience significant difficulties and challenges. And the state, after 2020, the AKP further escalated its policies, its violence. The state withdrew from the international conventions promoting gender equality, such as Istanbul Convention. And while LGBT plus people had previously been defined as threat to family values and, these traditional values, from this period onward, they increasingly began to be defined as group posing a threat to national security. So they were defined as a terrorist, explicitly, yeah. And these attacks, friends, attacks by AKP led to coalition-based alliances in Turkey. Women's groups and feminists with very different political positions, they come together on the same platform to oppose AKP policies. So all these attacks, friends, created a deep sense of pessimism in Turkey. And I understand this pessimist state, and I totally agree with it. However, I would say that drawing on my doctoral research, I would like to say that there is another dynamic at work in everyday life. Women and LGBT people continue to practice feminism in their everyday life. They practice feminism in their campuses, in their classes, in their workplaces, families. Yes, they may not include in the conventional organization forms, but they create their affinity groups, and I think there is another dynamics in the undercurrents of everyday life, and there is an incredible desire for liberation. And despite all its violence, AKP cannot suppress this desire for freedom and equality. And we see that AKP cannot shape the society around its own political agenda. AKP, since it has been more than 24 years, it has an entire state apparatuses. It uses violence. It withdraw from the conventions. It does its best, but still, it cannot regulate the society in line with its political agenda. So I think there is where we should look to understand the rise of violence and authoritarianism in Turkey. I would like to open this a bit more, and I only have 5 minutes, and then I will finish it because I already run out of my time. I'm sorry.
You're the organizer, you can do it.
Just 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. Because this point, I think, is important. Okay, so I think the rise of authoritarianism has a lot to do with this expansion of feminism, let's say. So let me clarify it. So over the past 20 years in Turkey, the influence of feminists and LGBT movement has grown significantly. Traditional gender norms in society have increasingly been questioned and challenged. At the same time, Kurdish movement, they follow their political projects, and they made an enormous political achievement. And we also see that there is an very commonalities and intersectionalities between leftist groups, between Kurds, between feminists, between LGBT peoples, and between some segment of socialist organization. The HDP party, People's Democratic Party, was one of the clearest example of this convergence. Friends, if the People's Democratic Party hadn't faced these attacks, its electoral support would likely to have continued to grow in the next elections. So we were like thinking, okay, so now we receive like 30% of the total vote, and in the next election, it was very, not acceptable. How to say? It was very possible. It was very possible to reach 15 and 17 maybe. Yeah. And what did AKP do? The AKP, didn't want this happen, and therefore targeted the party, creating a barrier against the growing alliances between the left and the Kurdish political movement. And authoritarianism became a way to stop this wave. And of course, friends, authoritarianism has not only, it's not only about these political processes. We also have an economic background. So another factor that contributed to authoritarianism was this economic crisis, let's say. So we are basically talking about 24-year rule of AKP, and over time, power became increasingly centralized, concentrated in Erdogan's hands, and the entire system and institution began to operate in the interest of particular groups, and capital flow became again concentrated at the hands of small groups, and predictability declined. And this influenced, this influenced the investment in the country. And we also already had neoliberal policies, and neoliberal policies had already made large segment of society economically fragile, and the economic crisis further intensified this fragility and insecurity. So under these conditions, under this centralization of power and economic crisis, authoritarianism is a necessary in their eyes to manage this crisis. Thank you for listening to me. Friends, so it is, well, it's already late by today.
We have 10 minutes for the discussion.
Yeah, but we have another very small.
We'll have 10 minutes and then.
Bengi, did we told you that?
I saw it. I said, don't worry about it.
Okay.
We have 10 minutes for questions. What we can do is, if there are many, we can take maybe 2 at a time, so we won't.
Yeah,
spend too
yeah,
much time.
perfect. Maybe 3.
Do you have anything in the chat?
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You presented a very good overview of this moment with all its different stakeholders in Turkey. Bermal, I'm wondering if we can't, whether we can today talk about an independent Kurdish women's movement, autonomous from the Kurdish party, Kurdish Nationalist Party. Or how can we evaluate the relationship between the Kurdish feminist movement and the Kurdish party? Do you have any
Kurdish movement in general, you mean, right?
Kurdish feminist movement?
Yeah.
And also the Kurdish political party.
Yes.
Nationalist political parties, or as you know, they have been changing. So this autonomy issue, what do you think that what insights can we think of about this issue?
Well, yes, Kurdish women's movement is for sure is a part of Kurdish movement in general. So it's organic part, but yeah, at the same time, within the larger movement, Kurdish women create their autonomous organizations in military, in politics, in municipalities, for example. And in these autonomous spheres, they produce their own politics, own theories. And when it comes to women's questions, it is Kurdish women that create the politics and theory. But when it comes to the Kurdish question in general, they all together engage in the process and try to provide a way, I would say. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I will come here. I know from your work actually that one of the dynamics that you study and you explored was that all of the established institutions of the feminist movement were being either attacked by the state and or were being kind of dismantled or were losing power. Although we see this kind of mass protest being participated with a lot more kind of women, particularly young women who self-identify as feminists, we see the institutions and the establishments of the feminist movement kind of being defeated. I think the same can be said for probably the LGBT movement as well, because the Lambda Istanbul has been shut down. I'm not sure about Kaos Gele, but the kind of the two
There's
big
like-
institutions of
Yeah.
it do not exist anymore, or at least like not in the same form. So I wanted to, but there's still like, there has to be some form of organizing, some institutions, maybe a lot more ephemeral, a lot more kind of temporary, flying and floating. But there must be institutions that sustain such mass mobilizations, right? So what are your observations on the way that the organizing or institutions and organizations of the feminist movement in Turkey have changed in the last maybe 20 years or 10 years? Where do people get together anymore? It's social media? Is it like, is it more informal organizing?
Yeah.
Is it more neighborhood based or university based? What do you think is happening?
Yeah. So, Bengi, so by the way, we still have feminist, organizations. For example, we have Havle, Islamic feminist organizations, and Aralık, for example. And they still exist, but the pattern, the dominant pattern change a lot. So what do these young women do if they are not in these institutions and if they are not in these platforms? So I would say that first of all, these young people they had a huge belonging to the idea of collective feminist movement. So they do not experience this, their perspective in an individualized way. For example, we see that in northern context. So I wrote an article, and one of the reviewer asked me, so you're talking about the grassrootization of feminist movement, and so it becomes the kind of everyday struggles, and it is the case already in Europe and in northern countries. So feminism is our default mode. So what's the difference between Turkey and this northern context? So I would say that in Turkey, so these young women and LGBT people, they do not experience it in a very individualized way. What they do, they basically, first of all, if they have a chance to participate all these collective protests, they do their best. They gather in the streets, they took the streets, and they do their best. But except from this mass protest, we see that young women and LGBT people, they create their affinity groups in WhatsApps, in social media groups, in neighborhood groups. So we see that everyday life is a constant struggle of feminist struggle. So they constantly struggle their feminist perspective, in campuses, for example, in their working life, in their parenting practices, in their romantic relationships. So I made an interview with these young generations. So I would say that they, they do not have, by the way, they do not want to organize in these institutions, not only because of the state repression and the state, close all these institutions, but there are any other dimensions. For example, let's say this precarity and long working hours, this has a lot, this really transformed the situation a lot. And the other reason is that feminist organization in Turkey, they prefer to stay close, because they think that feminist organization should be small, because when it gets larger and larger, it doesn't turn into a feminism, because you are in feminist organizations, you are supposed to discuss this private life and this personal issues. And when the groups get larger, and you are not able to do that, and people in feminist organizations should know each other in a very close way. So these are all feminist methodologies. So they try to keep themselves small. And young generation, I think they do not have their channels to get access to these organizations. Unfortunately, I would say that in Turkey, if you want to involve in these feminist organizations, you need to have a kind of political networks or academic networks. If you don't have these networks, you don't have access to these organizations. So I would say there are many other reasons for that. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for the intriguing.
Manage it yourself.
We talk about the Kemalist feminism as well, right? You didn't mention this, but I'm curious about the Kemalist feminism. To what extent the anti-systemic feminism and the Kemalist feminism overlap, or do they 100% contradict to each other? Maybe you can differentiate them for me.
So I really don't have any idea if where are these Kemalist feminists, if they still exist. I mean, I would say that feminist movement, is all these 8 marches and all these, they are organized by this anti-systemic, anti-capitalist and socialist, radical and anarchist feminists. And these anti-systemic feminists, they keep distance from Kemalist feminists, I will say. So there's very, you know, there's no, I wouldn't say there is no, there might be some, but very little. So there's very loose kind of connections, and yeah. Thank you so much. Yes.
I would very much like to hear more about the genealogy
Genealogy, yeah.
or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, from the Kurdish women's movement, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Can you say more? What is it? How is it similar, different, and ways?
Yes, for sure. So genealogy, yeah, it's a kind of they call it women's science. So what does it mean? It means that they come up with the idea that we will try to understand the world and we will interpret the world in a woman's-based perspective. So, and yes, so of course they acknowledge that they inspired a lot feminism and they influenced by feminism a lot, but there are some differences. So what is this differences? So I would say that genealogy comes up with a much more holistic perspective. So what I mean by that? So for example, while you know, so feminists in general, not all of them, of course, they only target patriarchy. So our enemy is patriarchy. But genealogy, they call it capitalist modernity as a whole. So we should not only target the patriarchy itself, but our enemy is capitalist modernity as a whole. So we cannot separate this patriarchy and capitalism and other system of oppression. And the other problem is this, that, and again, in genealogy, when they write their articles in the journal, they acknowledge that Abdullah Öcalan is our leader. It's our leader. So we are women's movement, and we embrace him as our leader. So and this is very problematic for feminists, because for feminists, a male leader cannot be acceptable. Male leader cannot be acceptable. And I would say that there's another important point that differentiates between feminists and genealogy. Of course, by the way, there are many others, but I really don't have time to do that. So the notion of freedom. So freedom, Kurdish women's movement say that freedom cannot be fragmented. We cannot struggle for the freedom of women. We should struggle for the freedom of people as a whole. So freedom is not, if you cannot struggle for the certain segment of the peoples of freedom, okay? Freedom is not that kind of thing. So we are free only if all of people are free. So this is another another difference. Feminists in Turkey, they are like, okay, we don't need to struggle for the men's freedom, okay? So it's not our responsibility. It's not our responsibility. So this is another difference, I will say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bermal. It's all the time we have for the questions. Thanks a lot. So now, without any break, we have some, we have a presentation.
Friends, after the break,
No, there's no break.
no break.
No break.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
You can come, Catherine.
Okay.
So we will hear from Katherine Lockyer. Do we say that?
Got it, yeah.
Correct. From Women of Diverse Origin. So it's not a long presentation. It's only a 15 minutes talk.
I'm gonna be quick.
And then we will end with some comment by Bengi, closing comments by Bengi.
Okay, well, hi, everyone. Thank you, Bermal, for inviting me to speak.
Uh,
My name is Catherine, but you can call me Kay. I am a member of the organizing committee of Women of Diverse Origins, and we put on every year here in so-called Montreal the protest and rally for International Women's Day. I've been a part of, I'll just call Women of Diverse Origins from now on FDO, meaning Femmes de Diverses Origines. It's easier than saying WDO. So I've been a member for 4 years. It's my 4th year organizing, being part of the organization of the march. I forgot to ask to be mandated to speak today as a member of FDO, so I'm kind of speaking as myself and my experiences as an organizer with FDO. So who am I? I'm a community organizer. I'm not an academic. I'm not very well educated, and all the learning that I have done about feminism, global issues, has been through struggle. It's been through organizing with groups and collectives. And that's really how I became politicized. And I'm very, very honestly, working with FDO, extremely grateful to be part of that group, because the learning, just what I've been exposed to by being part of that group, and the opportunities that I've had. Like, I got to interview and meet Leila Khaled. So just because I was like part of FDO, so how cool is that?
Wow.
And a little bit more about me, but I won't spend too much time, but just like, okay, what am I doing in FDO? Well, I used to work in a garment factory, and I was a machine operator and industrial seamstress, which has like a really rich history here in Montreal of militant women's organizing. And I learned about that history, and I also helped found a labor union in the factory that I worked in, which was mostly migrant women workers who worked there. And it was through that struggle, which we won. We have a collective agreement. We were able to get better wages, more paid days off, more sick days, guaranteed wage increases every year, health and safety calls, and a health and safety team. But it was through that work that I learned that there's a two-tier labor system here in Canada, and that migrant workers are basically that Canada has legalized a form of slavery. We do not, when we work together and I have status and they don't, so it is not a fair process. And it is very, very precarious for them. And now I mostly do neighborhood organizing. Okay, so what is Women of Diverse Origins? It's a collective. It has existed for 25 years now. It's the 25th anniversary this year that we have been organizing the protest or activities around International Women's Day. We only organize around International Women's Day, and it's been like that since the beginning. We are specifically a grassroots group, so we're all volunteers, and we are all very deeply connected to our individual communities or the groups that we're a part of. And we are an anti-imperialist feminist collective. That's very, very important. I feel like that doesn't exist a lot. And how we can agree on things, and the shared values and principles that we have are in a basis of unity that were written before my time, but that we follow and that we all respect. And too, if ever there's a disagreement or something arises. So our understanding of what anti-imperialism is that women's struggles and women's fight for liberation, it's impossible to disentangle from imperialism and all the tools that imperialism uses to subjugate people, women, all oppressed peoples. So the imperialism is a form of capitalism that is expanding. It uses war and militarism to expand. It uses colonialism. Sometimes it will, like we're seeing in the United States, revert to fascist tactics. It will heighten patriarchies. It will create patriarchy in some societies, some nations. It will fund and worsen fundamentalism in other places. And well, like we're seeing here in Quebec, it will create austerity measures that will then greatly affect women and their families and workers. The membership structure of FDO is, it used to be mostly organizations that would mandate someone to represent their grassroots organization, but now it's become more of a collective of individuals. But we still have many active organizations in the collective, like Filipino migrant women workers and family groups. The Dolores is part of the South Asian Women's Community Center. We have neighborhood groups like the Cape, which are active in Park X, Palestinian advocacy groups, some student social justice groups, some women without status or women migrant workers committees, and some groups that are specifically targeting sexual violence and those types of issues that women face. We're also a member of an international group called the International Women's Alliance and the International League of People's Struggles and the International Migrants Alliance. So these structures kind of help us maintain our internationalist perspective, but obviously all the women who are in the collective are able to bring that spirit of internationalism because they're deeply rooted in their communities, but also still have ties to their countries of origin. And the organizing committee is also very multi-generational. It's actually, I would say in all the groups that I've been in, it is the most multi-generational. There are youth, there are people like me who are almost middle-aged. There are the more senior women who have tons of experience and who are just willing to teach it to us. I've learned so much from them. We're multilingual, which complicates things, lots of translating and stuff like that. And it really truly is a diverse collective. So while we all do live here in so-called Montreal, because we live here and we live in the belly of the beast of the imperialist in the imperialist core, we see that as something important to organize around and something that we need to highlight, like our role as people living in the imperial core, and how Canadian imperialism plays a role on the global scale, especially in the global south, and how our feminism it's inseparable from that type of perspective. So this year, our theme was called Defiant and United, Women Against Austerity, Imperialism, Fascism, and Militarism. I think it always kind of rotates around something similar like that. There's only so many variations of it, but I think that that was really, this came from our analysis that we have to connect what is happening internationally with what women are then feeling here living in Canada. So the Canadian state is implementing all these austerity measures. The Quebec state is implementing all of these austerity measures. They're trying to repress women's right to wear a hijab. They're trying to repress labor unions. They are removing funding from our education, from our social services, from our healthcare, and then going and investing in militarism, so increasing our budget for NATO, producing and manufacturing arms, and then Carney going and saying that we support the US-Israeli war of aggression in Iran. So it's like imperialism in the global south and austerity here, and we want to connect those things and help women here understand that we have to be in solidarity the reason that you can't feed your kids, or that your grocery bills are so high, or your rent is so high, or you can't work in a public school because you wear a hijab, you can't access healthcare easily anymore, that getting an education is becoming tougher and tougher, is because of imperialism, is because of Canada's role in that type of system, global system. Every year also we make sure to mark the anniversary of the first International Women's Day. So it was our 25th anniversary this year, but it was also the 150th anniversary of the March for Bread and Roses. That's where garment workers, textile workers in Petrograd took to the streets to demand bread to feed themselves and their family, but also asked for roses, which is, a symbol of that women have a right to beauty, but also peace and justice in their life. And so that's something that we mark every year, because Women's Day is not just a celebration of women, but it's a celebration of our history of struggle. And it's important to mark that it was led by working class women who really, their actions made an empire at the end of the day fall, or they were part of that. And we cannot ignore women's role in history and in the struggle. I will try and wrap up. We reject bourgeois and liberal feminism. So we don't want to be a group that focuses only on the advancement of bourgeois women who ignore the realities of working class women, but also women in oppressed nations, women who just want to get ahead or want to be a boss babe. So we have a rejection of that. And this year we especially wanted to highlight the attacks on workers and migrants. So both the Canadian and Quebec government are attacking organized labor, our right to strike, which women are very, very much a part of, like, allowing us to have that right, restricting migrant rights, and increasing deportations. And we deeply recognize women's labor in all of this. So, and by labor, I mean both paid and unpaid labor that sustains society. And that is just so deeply undervalued, despite being essential. So, FDO, we're really committed to this stance of like international anti-imperialist feminism. And this year I felt was especially special. It was one of the largest marches we've had. There were 6,000 people in the streets. So we've been seeing for the last couple of years that it's getting bigger and bigger. There are more groups that are forming that want to be a part of something. It's definitely something we've remarked. Now the challenge is, okay, all these groups are coming out on International Women's Day. How do we consolidate them? How can we get them involved in our organizing? How can we, are we missing, do we have a blind spot maybe to what some people are organizing around? And that's our big challenge, I think, for the upcoming years. But I'm dedicated to being an FDO for as long as I can, and I know a lot of the other women are and have dedicated a lot to the group.
You are the group that organized 8 March in Montreal.
Yes.
Yes.
I said that, right?
You said that. Oh, I'm sorry.
I hope I said that. Yeah.
Okay, sometimes I am in the chat, right?
It's okay, it's okay.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's like the only thing we do.
Yeah.
Not that it's little. It's a big job. That's it. Nothing of that question. I don't know if anyone has questions. I'm sure you're all very tired.
So I already know you, so I don't have question.
I have a question. From I didn't go to the march this year. I went to the march last year. Was there any difference in the kind of groups that are associated this year?
Associated with FDO or came to the march?
Yeah, I guess because I was like just out of the groups, but I noticed that there's a bunch of groups. Yeah, so I was wondering how it changed this year.
There were just more of them. We haven't had, so every year we have a process where we assess how the march went, and we try to name all the groups that we can with the hopes of trying to make contact with them and work with them as part of like a coalition and a collective. But so labor unions have always been coming. They were still there. I think what I personally notice is that there are just a lot more like grassroots groups that seem to be coming, and I think people have, just because of like the global political situation, there's just a lot more people trying to get involved and trying to find their cause and their way to get organized. But we also, another like a challenge we have too is, you know, there are groups that want to hold their own International Women's Day event on March 8th, or like a big protest or walk, and then sometimes we get split, and that's something we really don't want to happen, is we want to find a way for everyone to be able to come together to an extent. You know, we don't, no thank you to like Zionists or whatever, but like an example of that is this year I saw that there were several different types of Iranian women's contingents, and some that certainly do not agree with each other. But that was interesting that they were all there.
You mean at the March 8th?
Yeah.
I didn't see any South Asian groups when I was there. I was within the Latin Americans, but I didn't feel like I quite understood their story, so it wasn't necessarily the same diaspora as I'm a part of. So I was like, oh, that's interesting, like, because I still haven't seen much of my diaspora in Montreal. So yeah, I was just wondering, like, where are they?
You can do it.
I'm looking.
The South Asian Women's Community Center and the DESI, sorry, it's
Rising.
yes, thank you. They're like very historically involved in FDO. Yeah. And then I guess Filipinos also technically are part, well, Southeast Asia, but lots of Filipino women's groups are founding members of FDO and play a very important role, and bring a lot to the group, because there's such a rich history and like an ongoing struggle there for national liberation, but also like there's like a people's war there that is very advanced, especially in like for the condition of women. The first gay marriage that has ever happened in the Philippines was in the Red Army there. It was a lesbian marriage. Through my work in FDO, I got to meet like women revolutionaries from the Philippines, like Julie de Lima and Connie Ledesma, who negotiate for the People's Army, who like struggle for national liberation there and socialism. They negotiate with like the state, with the Philippine government, fascist government. Very important revolutionary women that we have contact with. It's so cool.
I wanted to mention that Dolores said that she endorsed you speaking for.
Thank you, Dolores. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask.
Okay, thank you so
I have
much.
a last question from
Like, sorry,
Ask one more, is it okay?
Yes.
I don't want to drag so, but I'm just curious. I think it's great, this coalitional politics organized structure that you guys have, and because I feel like that has some, you know, that was very important and big in internationalist politics and in grassroots internationalist politics in the 1990s and the 2000s during the whole alter globalization period or the, anti-liberal period. And that has really fallen away, I think, in a lot of political organizing like this structure. So can you just talk about why you guys have stuck to this structure and how it works because of this way of just like, it's such an important and efficient and generative way to share what everybody is doing and to expand deepen those relationships.
It is a coalition, but it is a small coalition. And I was thinking, Bermal, when you were talking about like feminist practice of organizing, like it's a very intimate coalition. We always meet around a potluck, so everyone brings something that we share and eat together. We start our organizing off every year with just like a sharing, where people talk about what's going on in their communities. And then we try and collectively write a statement together based off of all of that sharing. So basically, if we have a blind spot, it's because it's not represented at the table. So that's how I see, I guess, the importance of this type of coalition or collective. But it's also it's very delicate too. Like a lot of the women in FDO are aging out of being able to organize with us, and one of my concerns or one of my fears is that like their knowledge is going to get lost, and that we've done our best to document it, but it could very easily be lost. And some years it feels like we're starting from scratch, and that, who has this contact? We lost it because this person health isn't good and they moved away to retire, things like that. So it's also very, very delicate. We're also involved with the Collectif 8 Mars, which is more that's the more mainstream feminist organizing here in Quebec. I've never been a part of it, but from what I've heard, it's tough. It's tough for the ladies in FDO, and they often feel tokenized or like marginalized within that type of organizing space. We are also a part of, there were talks of us being part of the Fédération des Femmes du Québec. But I think because we're a grassroots organization, it's hard for us to like be, once again, part of those larger, more mainstream institutional types of coalitions, especially with the Collectif 8 Mars. It's a lot of people who are paid to be there. They're labor organizers with their unions, and so they're receiving a wage to be there. One way we've negotiated with them is that they'll pay, if we send FDO delegates, they'll pay us. But it's still, if you work a job, you can't, even if you're going to be paid a wage, you can't just take a day off. And usually their meetings are an entire day. So yeah, we're a little grassroots collective where we like float around in these larger coalitions, but those coalitions are like certainly not perfect, and they do try and involve us, but it doesn't always work.
Thank you. Now it's your turn, Bengi, for closing words.
Turn again, like towards me, so me walking opposite. So I was asked by Bermal to have a kind of a closing remarks. I wasn't given a lot more instruction than that, but what I'm gonna try to do is to maybe tease out some of the threads or common points or points that were raised, not maybe in a common way, but in different ways. But I think what is important for us as those who self-identify as feminists or who care about feminist politics. First of all, for those who don't know me, I'm Bengi Akbulut. I'm the director of the Social Justice Center. I'm also faculty at the Department of Geography, Planning and Environment. full disclosure, I've known Bermal before she came to the center as a postdoc from political work, actually. So, and I'm being this, I will never get used to this. This is 5 years, and she's always done this every time I'm like, okay. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for still being here, but coming in person in true feminist fashion to this small intimate gathering of I think it's been a great event. I want to thank Bermal for putting it together, and I want to thank everyone who's on Zoom. She will hear this, but I just got a text from a friend who's online that she should immediately transfer to Concordia because all the great events are happening here. So thank you. This is a collective accomplishment. So I'm gonna try and like make this as connected and smooth flowing as it is, but as I can, but maybe there will be some disconnect. But I want to start with the first kind of theme for me that came up in different ways in everyone's talks is feminism and the nation, or feminism and nationalism, or feminism and the state. I mean, of course, these are not kind of always overlapping exactly 100%, but I mean, again, full disclosure, I don't believe in a left nationalism. I don't think nationalism can ever be not racist or not anti-immigrant. So I was kind of thinking about particularly Geneviève's kind of historicization of the feminist movement in Quebec and kind of how this revolutionary feminism emerged out of the kind of revolutionary, if you will, nationalism. But I mean, I think it's still an important kind of question for us, particularly in the way, I mean, not only when we're kind of thinking about the relationship of feminism to nationalism or nation building projects historically, but today as well in different kind of iterations of fascistization, if you will, or authoritarian politics, the same kind of, or the similar mobilization of kind of femo-nationalism, or the same kind of mobilization of women's liberation or women's kind of freedom lies in kind of anti-immigrant politics, or like protecting of Quebec's values. The same way in which, for instance, in Turkey, anti-Arab kind of racism, particularly with the kind of influx of Syrian refugees, is very much kind of enmeshed with like women's security and their body's security, but also in the way that kind of women's reproductive powers and bodies are being mobilized so that they make babies for the nation, right? So it is not a coincidence that kind of that women are now the terrorists in Turkey, because a lot of the mobilization have happened particularly around reclamation of reproductive rights, including abortion, including also kind of queer politics that basically denounce the family as kind of the foundational social unit and kind of the center of reproduction. So it is not a coincidence that women are the terrorists or like the traitors of the nation right now, not only because they're on the streets, but also because they deny or they refuse to make babies for the state. I mean, I think it's, but I think it's still kind of, it's important to think about, not denounce, but always kind of pay attention to how nationalism and women are being articulated in nation-making projects. And again, I'm gonna kind of, I was stuck with this understanding that kind of Geneviève mentioned, how the revolutionary feminism in Quebec in the 60s saw the connection or saw women's liberation as tied to national liberation. And then I was thinking of the Kurdish freedom movement the entire time when you were speaking, and then Bermal gave some much needed context, but so also again, to contextualize my involvement, I worked with the Kurdish freedom movement for years when I was back in Turkey, particularly in their democratic economy project. and also with the women's movement in their women's economy kind of discussions. So, as Bermal explained, this new life paradigm that the movement have kind of moved into, denouncing the nation state as a liberationary form, it's not only that it's built in or that it's founded on women's liberation, but it's kind of like reversing what Geneviève said about the feminist movement in Quebec. It's more that the nation's liberation is tied to women's liberation. Like everyone's liberation is tied to women's liberation. As Bermal explained, women's domination or patriarchy is seen as the original oppressive system, the original kind of power system that nation state and capitalism then kind of uses, especially also speciesism, for instance. So we can criticize that too. Like, is it really so? Or like, how useful is it to kind of essentialize maybe women's domination as such? But it's an interesting, I think, reversal of the connection. Also, it's interesting because I think a lot of the kind of left nationalism in Quebec also looks at the Kurdish freedom movement as kind of a parallel movement. So I think there's some conversation to happen there in terms of how do you see or how do you denounce nationalism but still build a kind of national liberation, or without a nationalism, if you will. That kind of brings me to perhaps more of an engagement with the state and or legality. Again, kind of this displacement of the struggle to the legal arena that Geneviève referred to in her talk is, I think, a very accurate or kind of a very striking observation, which kind of, I think, at a time, and also it's kind of paradoxical. I think like a lot of women's movements or feminist movements are fighting at the legal arena. There are many hard-won battles, hard-won rights that we thought, or like that was thought, considered to be kind of hallmarked into constitutions or legal structure, but they're very easy to lose. Like we're kind of witnessing that. So like there's constant fight in that legal, constant energies and constant kind of resources being, but it's also kind of at a time where extra legality is becoming less extraordinary and more ordinary. So even like this fight to kind of keep those legal gains, it's kind of meaningless now because there will be an eminent domain, or there will be the kind of the notwithstanding clause. So I think like we really need to, at a time, again, where authoritarian politics and outright fascism is on the rise and it's here to stay for a while, how much appealing to the laws and like legality, kind of fighting there, is actually politically productive. I think this is something that we need to be thinking entirely, like all the time, and kind of around that, of course, like, has the legal system ever been feminist? Like, is it even? It is, of course, a space that protects us or should protect us, but it cannot be the end or the beginning or the end of the struggle. And I was kind of thinking also, I mean, because this has been a very recent, I mean, in Turkey, there's been a recent kind of manifestation of that because Turkey, under the government whose policies Bermal very well kind of explained, has withdrawn from the Istanbul Convention. It's a European convention or European-based convention for the protection of women and children against violence. It was a very populist move by the government, and women, the feminist movement kind of united around the protection and defense of this convention, and not because we thought, oh, it's going to save us, or it's a big feminist kind of revolutionary law, but it's withdrawal from that, repealing that law itself, gave a very clear signal to the patriarchal order and its civilian tentacles, if you will, that they will go, that there's impunity. There's not going to be any repercussion if you beat your girlfriend, or if you set your wife on fire or whatever. So laws never really protected us, but they are they are things to build on. But when I was listening to Florencia's presentation, there were so much parallels between Turkey and Argentina about how mass mobilizations were sparked often by feminicide, by kind of this almost commonplace mass scale killing or violence against women. But what kind of, again, I'm going to tie this back to the legal or the kind of laws or or the legal arena as an arena of struggle. She was, I don't know if you remember, but she started with all these gains in the legal sphere that they made starting in early 2000s, all the while like feminicides were rising. So that is also, it's kind of this conundrum, like kind of makes me question, okay, like we thought not withdrawing from the Istanbul Convention was important because like it's gonna increase like violence against women, and maybe it has even like no effect. I don't know. But like there's kind of this, it's a different articulation, obviously, in every context. But I think how and if and how much to struggle in the legal arena is a question we need to be asking. And the third point, I don't know what's happening time-wise, but it's my last point, kind of brings me to what are feminist demands today? I mean, including where to and how to struggle, whose demands are coded or thought of as feminist demands. Again, I don't want to put Geneviève in the spotlight, but like a lot of kind of my thinking is like, because hers was one of the first talks kind of got, but the feminist demands that were won by the feminist movements in Quebec, like pay equity or, I mean, I have them, daycare, pay equity, parental leave, etc. Of course, I mean, these are things that we often think of as the kind of classic, traditional, feminist demands, but but still should make us question at whose expense are these demands won, right? I mean, we might have daycare, but who's now like working at daycares, under what conditions should be a part of the feminist demand. So so again, like in Argentina, in Florencia's presentation, like abortion or kind of protection or like ending of violence against women, these are kind of the feminist demands and very much kind of echoed in mass mobilizations of the feminist movements in Turkey. And still like today in Turkey, violence against women is kind of the main issue on the table. But I mean, Florencia was talking about also extractive, like towards the end, she was like, there's like with the current government, the expansion of extractivism, and extractivism is a feminist issue, right? But it's like, it's never been as organically coded by the movement or outsiders to the movement as a feminist issue. It's the same in Turkey. The current government developmental policy, economic developmental policy has been based on extractivism, construction, mining, large infrastructure, and has posed unprecedented levels of harm, social and ecological. And for the first time, again, in a kind of unprecedented manner, women were at the forefront of ecological and urban struggles. But that became a kind of a feminist demand quite late into the game. So it was kind of this separation or disconnect, which, and again, also kind of reminds me of the conditions of economic marginalization that different kind of people refer to in different ways today. Florencia talked about how kind of precarity and economic marginalization, hardship is undermining ability to participate in feminist organizing. It's something that also I think Bermal has not in today's talk, but like we had talked about this, that it is people have to work and they have to often work multiple jobs. So they cannot go to a meeting like every night in their kind of feminist organization. So that makes economic security a feminist demand as well. So I'm going to end here. I think whose demands are feminist demands and what would be feminist demands today to fight multiple and intersecting systems of power and oppression. I think we already have answers for that, but I think it's a good way, good thing to keep thinking about. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Bengi. I know that Dolores and Florencia are still online, so a last warm thank you for all the speakers. Thank you. We would have loved to have you with us, but it's very, very nice that you were able to spend the day with us online. Thank you, Florencia. Thank you, Dolores.
Thank you. It's very interesting what she was saying about the legal arena and the tension with the cultural transformation, because I think now in a regressive time, we think, okay, the most important thing was the cultural transformation, because certain gains in the legal arena can be cut up. We are seeing that, for example, in the United States with abortion in certain states that is again prohibited. No, even they gained that in the 70s. No, but I think it's a dialectic relation, because at the same time, all the gains in the legal arena produce a cultural transformation because of, for example, the trials to perpetrators of state terrorism, or because of gender identity law. New generations grow up in a nation that believes that state terrorism was a terrible thing, and the respect for diversity is a good thing, no? And if we don't if we wouldn't fight for that institutional gains, it would never occur, no? So I think both aspects are important and are in constant relationship, because sometimes first occur the counter transformation and then the change of the laws, but sometimes certain law could transform new minds, no? So well, it's very interesting what you are saying about that, because I also noticed that in Turkish presentation was present that tension, no? Thank you very much for this journey.
Thank you, everyone.